Conditions may apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 78. This could be the start of something new. Izuku rubbed the sleep out of his eyes and checked his phone. All Might, 9:24 a.m. Great! Meet me here at noon. All Might shared a location. Izuku stared at the message, dumbfounded for longer than he'd like to admit before realizing it was already 11:21. He sprung up out of the couch faster than he ever had in his life and tore through his meticulously organized clothes in order to find what he was looking for: a fitted, lightweight, long-sleeve top and a pair of jeans. That would probably work, right? What was the plan? He stopped in front of the mirror and finished the half-assed job he'd done taking off his eyeshadow last night and booked it out the door before he even knew where he was going. Checking the location All Might had sent, he was both delighted and confused to find that it was Dagobah Beach. That was only like a 12-ish minute walk. But why the hell did All Might want to meet there? Deciding not to look a gift horse in the mouth, he booked it for the beach. He wasn't going to be late for All Might. Kami, he was meeting All Might. He was texting All Might. That alone was enough to boggle his mind. He's not sure he was prepared for whatever he was getting himself into, but really, when was he ever properly prepared for anything he did? Dagobah wasn't a huge stretch of beach, but it was incredibly easy to get lost among the mountains of debris. So when he got there, only 16 minutes early, he climbed up on one of the bigger and more stable mounds of trash to keep a lookout. He was expecting All Might to drop out of the sky, as was his customary entrance, but he didn't. He watched him pull into the disused parking lot in a modest pickup truck. He looked around for a moment until he spotted Izuku on his perch. He looked surprised for a second, but quickly smiled and waved to him before walking over. All right. Okay. All Might was walking over. He should probably get down and meet him at a reasonable altitude. This was fine, and Izuku wasn't freaking out about it at all. He made his way carefully down the side of the mound of rubbish and waited in a small clearing nearby. Hopefully it wouldn't be too hard to find him here. Maybe he should have stayed where he was so All Might didn't have to jump up to find him. Should he go back up now? Or was it too late? He shoved his second thoughts down as he saw All Might peek out from around a neighboring pile of trash. He was still looking up to the top of the pile Izuku had been on, but his gaze settled on the clearing quickly. You're a fast one, aren't you? He greeted cheerfully. Izuku wished he was Ivy right now because he was sure his blush from the compliment was quite noticeable. He didn't know what to say, so he just said hello and bowed politely. I'm glad you accepted the offer. Now, I bet you're wondering what we're doing in this dump. Yeah, you're not ready for my power, he exclaimed, cutting Izuku's response off. Okay. Izuku didn't know what to say to that either, so he just stood there watching All Might and waited for an explanation. My quirk, one for all, is a whole lot to handle. The combined physical abilities of everyone who's ever used it creates a hurricane of pure force. An unprepared body can't fully inherit it. Your arms and legs would shoot off if you tried to, he continued. Oh, that made sense. He was already pretty fit, but he wasn't built like All Might. He was too lean, built for speed rather than strength. All Might was pretty fast too, though he shouldn't have to worry about being too slow once he gets the quirk. But in the meantime, he might have to adjust. Wait, the quirk gives the wielder the physical abilities of everyone who came before? How does that work? Does that include quirks? If someone down the line knew how to juggle, does that muscle memory somehow transplant itself into the next wielder's brain? That would be pretty confusing. Quit mumbling, kid. I can't hear a word you're saying. Oh, I'm sorry, he squeaked out before slapping a hand over his mouth. Quite all right, my boy. Now, as for what we're doing here, this is your training. You want to go to UA, don't you? All Might asked. Yes, of course, that's the dream, Izuku answered readily. Well, then you have 10 months before the entrance exams. This beach used to be beautiful before all this junk piled up. So you, young Midoriya, have 10 months to restore it to its former glory. 10 months to work up a sweat and build up those muscles. Izuku couldn't help but look around at the landscape of garbage surrounding them with wide eyes. 10 months? Not to worry, kid. I've got you covered with the help of my aim to pass American Dream plan, he declared in a booming voice as he held out a stack of papers, handing it to Izuku. Follow this to the letter, and the beach should be cleaned up just in time. I also detailed every other aspect of your life while I was at it. Izuku started scanning over the pages and his heart dropped. It outlined his sleep and diet, and it called for far more time and money than he had to give. If I'm being honest, it's going to be super hard. Think you're up for it? All Might asked, his voice a little more reserved than it had been. Izuku already slept less than the plan called for. Maybe he could use that time to try and drum up the funds for the sheer amount of protein All Might was proposing that he eat. He was going to have to start pickpocketing people on patrol again, but there were so many fewer people to pickpocket now that the Yakuza had been disbanded. Kami, this was going to be hell, but his life was kind of already hell. At least he had something to fill in the void of free time he had now that he wasn't on stakeouts damn near 24/7. Plus, a good portion of what All Might was proposing was cardio, and he would be doing that on patrol regardless. His cardio was pretty damn good, if he did say so himself. He didn't need to dedicate so much time to that. With determination, he looked back up at All Might and said, I'll do whatever it takes. And so it began. Every Monday through Thursday morning, Izuku would rise well before the sun and meet All Might at the beach to haul trash into a construction-grade dumpster he'd rented. After the morning workout, he would go to school, and in the afternoons, he was instructed to do cardio on his own, which he did, just not in the afternoon and not the normal jog along a nice path kind of way All Might probably meant. Instead, he threw himself along rooftops each night until the wee hours of the morning. But it was still cardio, and what All Might didn't know couldn't hurt him. On Fridays, he got the morning off, and Izuku took that opportunity to go to school early and scrub a week's worth of sweat and grime off his aching body. He wished quite desperately he could go back to 2 showers a week, but that wasn't going to happen on this schedule. On Friday afternoons, All Might met him at the beach after school, and he'd pick through the stacks of trash until what most people would consider dinner time. But Izuku didn't eat dinner until around 10:30 or 11, when he met up with a racer. He was supposed to rest on Saturdays, but he rarely did. He spent most of the day hauling as much scrap as he could to the yard, and usually he would patrol at night as well, unless their break day with the racer happened to fall on Saturday. Finally, every Sunday, he was out on the beach with All Might from sun up to sundown. Sunday night patrols were quickly becoming the bane of his existence. After hauling trash on and off for upwards of 12 hours, the last thing Izuku wanted to do was intensive cardio. But he dug his grave, and all he could do was lie in it. Toshinori watched as Midoriya picked through the garbage on the beach bit by bit. It felt wrong to sit without helping. It was second nature for him to offer a hand whenever he saw someone struggling, be it grabbing something from the top shelf at the store or lending a hand to someone who was far too determined to get all their trash to the garbage in one trip. But this was his training. He was supposed to struggle, so Toshinori only stepped in to break down things that would have been impossible for the boy to move on his own. He didn't carry them for him, he just tore them into manageable pieces. He had been worried that these cleaning sessions would get boring for him because he wasn't allowing himself to help, but young Midoriya kept things far more interesting than he'd expected and far more interesting than he'd like at some points. He was constantly scaling up and down the mountains of trash, grabbing things and sorting them by material, which Toshinori was delighted by. He had wanted to recycle what could be recycled, but he'd figured that sorting would add too many work hours to the project. But Midoriya did it without prompting, and didn't seem to be suffering time-wise for it. The climbing, however, is where the boy began to stress him out. The structural integrity of the trash mounds was deplorable at best and subject to change at all times, but Midoriya kept leaping around with the grace of a cat. It was as impressive as it was concerning. Every time a foothold crumbled beneath him, Toshinori's heart lurched, and he'd go to catch him, but he always maneuvered himself onto another bit of rubbish and went about his way like nothing happened. He wanted to ask about it, but the boy was always so skittish. That was something he was going to have to work on. He may have the drive and the values Toshinori needed in a worthy successor, but he did not have the charisma. He needed to hold himself with far more confidence than he currently had. Toshinori wasn't helping him by catering to his anxieties, plus his curiosity had been getting the better of him. "My boy, how did you learn to do all that jumping around? You're quite agile," he asked one day when Midoriya had just come down from fetching a busted microwave to set in the growing pile of irreparable electronics. "Oh, yeah, I took some gymnastics classes as a kid. I've always had a thing for climbing, I guess," he replied just as nervously as Toshinori had come to expect. "Don't be so sheepish about it, my boy. It's impressive. That talent of yours will be very useful to you as a hero. Agility is a difficult skill to teach. Having skills that honed at your age will set you apart from the crowd, and you'll only get better and better once you get into UA," he cheered, trying to instill some confidence. He's not sure that it worked. The boy just turned beet red and nodded. This was going to be more difficult than he'd imagined. He was used to people being nervous around him. It was just part of being All Might. He was hoping that Midoriya would warm up to him after a few meetings, but it had been a week and a half now, and he still clammed up every time Toshinori so much as looked at him. He was at a loss for what to do about that. He knew how to calm people down in a crisis. He knew how to charm or leave a good impression, but he didn't know how to do this. He supposed that's the consequence of keeping people at an arm's length. He watched idly as the boy went back to his task and thought about his predecessor. What would she have done? She always had a way of setting people at ease. Toshinori had his own slew of anxieties when he was Midoriya's age, but Nana always knew what to say. He had felt safe with her right off the bat. What was he doing wrong? He had precious little time with Nana, but she made her impact regardless. He would never forget the lessons she taught him. He knew his days were numbered, but not nearly as numbered as hers had been. He had time to figure this out. He would figure this out. Just a few weeks into the project, Toshinori stopped stepping in to help almost entirely. Midoriya had been collecting and setting aside wheels and poles in the same pile. He hadn't questioned it, but he had been curious. His curiosity was assuaged one morning when he showed up to see young Midoriya fastening together the wheels and poles into axles. He lined two of them up in front of an industrial-sized refrigerator, stuck another pole underneath the fridge on the other side, and used it as leverage to tip the thing over and onto the wheels. Toshinori watched in fascination as he pushed the massive thing forward on the wheels, rolling it onto a third axle and off of the first. Then he took the first set of wheels, brought it from the back to the front, and kept pushing. He cycled through that until he had moved the easily 600-pound refrigerator all the way to the dumpster on his own. He couldn't lift it up to put it inside, but Toshinori was more than happy to help with that. The wheels weren't made for sand either. It must have been quite difficult for him to push that forward, given how small he was. He was quite impressed. The boy was stronger than he looked. "What a creative use of your resources, young Midoriya. You've got the brains and the brawn, he praised as he tossed the fridge into the skip. Just like every time Toshinori congratulated him, the boy blushed profusely and looked down to his shoes while he mumbled out vague thanks and or denials. He fought the urge to sigh at his continued timidity as the boy promptly returned to his work. They'd get there eventually, hopefully. End of chapter.